Hello, early people.
Hi, Frodo. I have to
So, can,
leave at 9 for my oops, meeting, my creativity meeting.
that sounds like a worthwhile reason to leave.
And
Um,
I'm recommending this book.
how forests think, okay?
Yeah, it's building on Deacon semiotics, but it's all about messaging and how it works and signs.
Interesting. Looking it up right now. Added to baskets. We'll have a look later. So today, because of the internet last week, I still don't have fiber at home. I'm at the World Society, the RSA, so I'm going to be a little bit quiet, but at least I can hear you all perfectly and you can hear me still, right?
Yeah, for a while there, you sounded like you were short of oxygen.
Okay, that's interesting.
It sounded like this.
It's fun. It's hard to find the bits where I can turn on so that you get better sound. Let me just check this. Yeah, it's quite odd. Anyway, how are you guys?
So far, so good.
That's a good sign. Good starts.
I'll take a quote from Bob Ross and say, "Every day's a good day when you paint."
When
Yeah,
you
that's a
paint,
good one.
are we painting today?
We are painting today. On Thursday, I had a meeting with Chris Gutteridge, who may very well join us today, talking about the big issue of space, predominantly how to share spatial things. Oh, here we go. Mic mode. Is this worse or better right now compared to when I'm talking right now? Same, right?
It's okay. You sound like you need a hot bourbon toddy, though.
Well, I'm trying to be quiet. That's what I'm trying to do. Ah, there's a new face, Jeremy. I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong, but hello, Jeremy.
Hello.
Mhm.
So today, because of bad internet, last week I'm at the Royal Society. So if I'm talking a bit quiet, that's because other humans. So if you both forgive me, at least the bandwidth should be fine today. So that's good. Andrew, how was your meeting or your thing in
My
the
my
Seattle?
conference. Yeah, it
Your
was really good.
conference?
Yeah. Um, had a great time. Learned a bunch of stuff. Yeah. It's a bit unrelated to this work, but it was very useful for my other job. So yeah, good time.
What do you want to tell us more? What kind of meeting was it?
Sure. It was Unreal Fest in Seattle. Um, so Unreal Engine and game development and stuff like that, which is what I do for my other job. Lots of new
Oh, that's cool.
features, and I got to talk to the devs and stuff like that.
Oh, that's really, really cool that you have experience with proprietary and open XR stuff. So that's quite brilliant for everybody.
Is
Absolutely.
Unreal available for the Vision Pro?
Unfortunately, not right now, at least not in a stable way. There's some clever workaround people have done to get it working, but it's certainly not what you would call like a supported platform at the moment.
That's fair enough. So we'll wait another minute or two. Why don't we just mention where we are, and then we'll do some brief introductions. Rob, we know you are in California,
I am.
in the heart of Silicon Valley.
The beating heart, the still beating mechanical heart of Silicon Valley.
Yes, exactly. Sorry, something happened on the screen. Yeah, no, it's an amazing place. I'm in London at the RSA due to bad internet at home. And Carl Arthur Smink, as opposed to Carl Hebenslate, you are in Minnesota, right?
No, Alexandria, Virginia, right by DC.
Oh, I meant the
Washington,
other
DC.
Carl. So yes, you're in
Oh,
Virginia.
okay, you said Havenstrike, didn't you?
I did. I said as opposed to, so it was a bit not well worded, especially when half whispering across the world. But yeah, you're in Virginia, and Carl Arthur is in
I'm in Mississippi, so I am in Starkville.
Mississippi. My ignorance of America is vast, almost as vast as the continent.
That's okay. So is mine.
And Jeremy, welcome.
Thank
Where
you.
are you, and how do you know of us?
I am in Switzerland, in St. Gallen, and I think you've met Jessie in the Hypertext conference in Poland. And
Yes.
I was a co-author on an article, and she recommended me to join this Zoom call because she thought it would be interesting for me.
Yeah, very good. Very glad you are here. Absolutely. And Andrew, you are in.
I'm in Washington, US, or on the
Which-
Pacific Coast.
Yeah, which I have learned is referred to as the Pacific Northwest.
Indeed, it is.
Of course, it is the Pacific Northeast if you look at it from the Pacific's position.
But if you look at it from the land, which is where we are, it would be the West.
Yes, yeah, exactly. You win. And then we have CJG, Christopher Gutteridge, the hero of the moment, at least in my eyes, and I will tell you all why in a minute.
No project. I'm in my kitchen because I've got to do some cooking, which is why my camera off because it will be very distracting otherwise. There's like a lot of things to chop, so I'll keep my camera off mostly until that's done. But yeah, Frode's been badgering me to come and say hello about some of the stuff we've been talking about. So hello, and I'm in Southampton. I should say that's the more important fact.
The south of the England, exactly. Yeah, no, I'm very excited. As some of you have seen, what Fabian and I have been discussing in depth, Christopher and I discussed on Friday, taking it a bit further. So we're going to go through that. And Mark, you're not very far away from Chris, are you?
No, I'm in sunny Portsmouth on UK south coast, so about 3/4 of an hour away from Southampton.
Perfect. And Fabian, hello.
Hello, I'm in Brussels, Belgium.
I have to admit, there aren't that many things French people say that's charming, but I do love it every time you say hello. I'd have to admit. And Leon, you are in further Eastern Europe.
Yes, I'm calling in from Budapest, Hungary. So, hello, everybody.
Hello, everyone. Chris, we can see your cat's dinner as well there, by the way. That was funny. And finally,
Sorry.
Chris, no problem. For this group, we have Chris. Hi, Chris. Where are you in the world?
I'm in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in the US.
It's so amazing what these online meetings can do. So, yeah, today our discussion continues on space in XR. But specifically today, I want to pitch an idea to you that's developed from discussions primarily with Fabienne and Chris. It's really simple, but it's based on specific problems. Number one is the problem of who will own XR, cyberspace, metaverse, whatever we want to call it. And even though you all know, I'm going to pretend you don't to save time. When you share something on a screen, you are doing a passive projection. You can just show someone on a TV. Fine. When you share in XR, at least if you're sharing a dimensional thing, like a knowledge sculpture of 3D bits here and there, you are showing a thing, a structure. So that we can't get away from, not that we should. But what are you smiling at, Andrew? I'm really intrigued. You look so intrigued.
It's so out of context. You actually want to know.
Yes, of course we do.
All right. So my brother just sent me a notification that he was playing a game, but his computer is right behind me, and I was utterly baffled as to how this was possible. Turns out he just got a new laptop and was stress testing it, but it's less interesting now that I know the answer.
Yeah, brothers are a mystery all over the place. Yeah, sorry, I just got so intrigued by you being intrigued. Right.
I'm sorry, I was smiling too big.
No. Nothing better than smiling in a meeting. Right. So the thing is one of ownership, because when you look at something in XR, you are in a completely created environment. So some company will own the space you're in, visually, every single pixel. Open source or not, it will be owned. We all know this. We all know the issues. Other than if you have just transparent glasses with overlay, as Meta's experimenting with. So then we get to questions of, if we now all put on headsets and we share this knowledge sculpture of all kinds of things, text, images, 3D models, links, all those good things, how can we each see it? Are we seeing the high fidelity original thing? Are we seeing a flat version of it? What are we seeing? These are important issues for us. The other issue that comes up is, if we have an XR environment where all the standards are completely open, how can a commercial company innovate by making new software? Of course, there are answers to this, but it's almost an either or, right? So what Chris pointed out on Friday is that on a traditional computer on the desktop, we have icons representing data. So anybody can select some icons, copy them, move them around. On your desktop, you can pile them up in the corner if you want. You can even rename them, and you can delete them. So you can manipulate the icons, even if you can or cannot open them. So let's say one is a .psd file. If you don't have Photoshop, you can't open it. But you can still see the little preview icon, right? This is tremendously exciting to think of as a model for going into XR. So, oh, hang on. Peter is joining. I'll give him a 10-second update. It's weird how the audio always takes a bit of time to connect, but that's the reality. Hi, Peter.
Good morning.
Hi.
I'm afraid I'm going to have to start early at the top of the hour to provide transport today, just routine. So everybody's doing well, though. But if there's anything you want to put on within the first hour.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'm just pitching a little thing. Excuse me, I've been talking with Christopher Gutteridge and Fabian, and the notion is how to share information in XR space without having problems with ownership, development, lots of questions. We can spend hours on the issues, but here's the proposed solution approach. As I was saying to everyone else, on your desktop computer, you can move icons around. These icons very often have previews. So even if you don't have Photoshop, you can still see a little bit of an icon of the image on your desktop. So the notion really is this: to develop XR dimensional icons. So the reason this is an amazing breakthrough, I think, is that there's a couple of levels, because we also looked at hypercard in XR, and then we talked about what to call things. Is it a card and a stack, or are we talking about atoms and molecules? All these language things went around. But the notion of icons seemed to make so much sense. So imagine me in my environment, for instance, an author and a map. I move stuff around, and then I give it to you guys through a JSON. You see it, and what you get is the preview icon, which may be a picture, maybe just a line of text. It may be a small 3D icon itself, if it's a 3D thing. It could be all kinds of things. Associated with it, it has to have at least spatial information relative to these other things. It has to have some kind of a name or a preview. And then other than that, and this is the really key thing, the actual thing itself may or may not be there. Right? It could be a reference to something else. It's like in the olden days of print desktop publishing. You could send the whole thing, but the high resolution images may not have been included and that kind of stuff. So what this might mean is that if we just take the positional data, quote unquote icon data, that is all we need. If there is more stuff underneath that, that's fine. That's the special stuff. I do have more, but I expect questions and I won't be talking too much. So any questions, or should I say the other bit?
So
Questions or comments?
What you're describing just sounds like a generic parent class, if you want to use a programming paradigm, which is these are the mandatory variables. This is the mandatory information that has to come with objects of these types, but you can make child classes of that parent class to add additional information on top of what is required, but still keep things categorized separately. So like when they teach this in the intro programming class, they tell you we're going to make a vehicle class and it has some number of wheels, it has a weight, it has a top speed, it has like the variables that are required for something to be a vehicle. And then you make child classes underneath that, like this is a truck, which extends from the vehicle parent class, but it's different from a car or a semi or a bicycle. They all they all reference that same parent class and all have to have the variables that are in the parent class, but they can each have their own unique variables on top of that or that override and replace those mandatory ones.
I would like Chris or Fabian to comment on that because I'm not sure if we have to be that strict. But first, yeah.
Okay, I'll just make sure I'm here. So what we were talking about was the difference between what's essential for existing in a 3D world and what is the payload. I was trying to talk through Freud, separating out the payload for 3D and interactions or spatial interactions from the actual underlying thing that they were pointing to, which I was imagining you'd probably have some kind of protocol that would keep track of where the things were and could broker any interactions. And specifically, I was imagining that quite often, if you say imported the chapters of a document, what you would be doing would be actually interacting with a separate workspace that would exist inside your workspace as an interactive object, and the subparts of that would exist in their workspace, as we said, hierarchical, so that when you move it in that, anyone interacting with that workspace sees the change. So it's almost like having a model you can play with, but most of the time you probably don't need it unpacked into parts. You just have what we were talking about, calling a 3D icon for it, which would just be a visual representation. Most things in 3D space don't really change much. They're fixed in position and they're fixed in shape. So you don't need live updates. Some things you might want to have a way you could subscribe to them or read, write, make live changes and receive live changes. And it wouldn't need to be a subscription per channel, per object. It would be per server or per instance of the protocol. So your local laptop might have one created by your Freud, author application. And author could then provide a workspace that you could interact with to modify, to visualize and potentially interact with, modify elements inside a document. But author might have 50 documents on the go, and you just say which digital objects you're currently looking at and tracking, so that if someone else is logged into the same thing and moves one, you see the physical moves or updates. Mostly I've just been trying to think what the least moving parts to get something like this, I mean conceptual parts, that you could then build on top of. Obviously security matters, but security is a solved problem again and again, so I'm not too worried about that one. And the other one is just networking of where do you store information canonically. And I am a programmer, so Freud drives me nuts sometimes because I'm always like, no, I was thinking of it, and he always wants a beautiful theoretical thing, and I'm trying to deal with the realities. So things on your computer would only be, if it's physically on your computer, it can only be connected to by other people who can connect to your computer. And more likely, most of the time, you'd be doing it in the cloud and the equivalent of a Google Doc style thing, but the updates could broker both changes to the coordinates relative to the workspace. And by workspace, I would mean there's a workspace for the document that is existing in your workspace, and you can translate and scale it in your and rotate it in your workspace, but then you can tweak all the little icons individually in that. You'd also probably want to represent connections between things visually in some way, and they're probably a different problem. I haven't put too much thought into that yet, but he only asked me about drinks on it. He asked me over drinks on Saturday or Friday, so I'm doing my best. Okay.
Yes, what Chris said. Peter, and then Carl, of course.
Okay. Instead of going with class-based inheritance, I recommend prototype-based inheritance, which is the natural model for the JavaScript world of the browser. Also, it gives us the ability to delegate out to a local position manager, say, within each person's environment, so that you could override what the general defaults are very flexibly at runtime. Also, we probably need to have some app registered with Apple so that we could recognize document bundle types. Like authors' files are a document bundle, which is really just a special kind of folder, but you have to have a package registered with the Apple operating system for the Finder to treat a folder ending in an extension as if it's a file for visual purposes on a person's desktop. That'd probably be different on other platforms, and we could probably have two approaches, one where it's a folder, the other approach where it's just basically a package of zip data with a different extension on the end so that it would actually be a single unitary file.
Yeah, just briefly on that before you, Carl, if you don't mind.
And I dropped a little note to Apple's documentation on how they handle package registration in the sidebar.
So I am going to experiment with this using JSON, as we talked about. I'm rewriting my author for Vision Pro to only do this, not writing documents, only do the mapping thing. So it'll be a proprietary operating system example of what we're going to be doing in XR. But I just briefly wanted to mention the top level issue, which every time I worked in a visualization of documents, it always gets to the point of, but how do I get from this thing to other documents? With this kind of a model, there is no necessary home screen. There is no necessary desktop. You can choose whatever shape you want and link it to any other shape. Carl, please.
Sounds to me like you guys are trying to build a game engine, which is not a bad thing to do. I'm just wondering why we would need to build it from the ground up. So you're talking about we have a 3D scene, we have objects in them that have a location, which is, if you want to use Unreal or Unity terms, is called a transform. It has a coordinate in XYZ space, it has a rotation, it has a scale value. And that same scene can either be local on your machine and you load it through that application. It can be streamed to you over the net if you connect to somebody else's machine or to a server via either peer-to-peer or a client server model. One user's changes can or cannot propagate to the other user. So if I move something, you can see that I moved that thing if the scene is replicated, or you can not see that change if the scene is not replicated, in which case we can both be in the same scene with different state, or we can both start with the same scene and make our own version of it by not replicating that state. So is there something remarkably different from that sort of base engine paradigm that we're trying to get at?
I think the main thing is presenting a way that a piece of software without a huge amount of investment could create a server that just either locally or on the web or on the internet that just brokered interactions for a few objects it cared about And that where you talk about a scene and the transforms, if you think about each one of those subparts potentially being brokered by a different server in a different place, that you don't have to have them all in one place, and other people might be importing the same thing into their workspace. So it's rather than having a single game engine with someone in charge, you've got, this is my world, and these objects in that my world are not part of my world, they're part of someone else's. And I think that's looking at a top level API protocol. Freud's using the word JSON, I think, to mean protocol here, to open it up so people could, with relative ease, make basically interactable objects for this world on their app or on their website or on their servers, but and not have one parent have an actual metaverse, not the walled garden.
So you're building Thingiverse?
I think maybe metaverse more like Neil Stephenson originally had it. But
We're building knowledge sculpture-verse. Chris. Oh, sorry, just a little bit on that, actually. Part of the notion here is, ideally, you're not going to be sitting in one room that is owned by one company and having one set of knowledge floating about. You will probably want to be in Peter Wasilko's memory palace. You probably want to have Mark Anderson's sculpture of HCM documents in the corner, etc. So it's basically about having sets of sculpture, sets of related things. I use the term sculpture, maybe it's not the best term, but that they all can come from different places, and therefore you don't need to be in this place or that place. Chris, please, and then Fabian, of course.
Yeah, I certainly have a lot of ideas on the distributed data management side of things. That's my area. That's part of the reason why. Two points. One is that, like in the past, when I've mentioned sort of the hash-based addressing schemes, that was not intended to be human visible. So I think there's also a question at the UI level, at what abstraction we're seeing things like, is it, visualizing, say, a file system versus visualizing sort of more of the sculpture idea. A lot would be hidden if there were, say, my ideas are like multiple repositories where all the information layers based on immutability and referencing would be handled behind the scenes. And then, the final UI could probably even be generated very dynamically. It gets into a lot of the AI angles as well with sort of dynamic content it's more of a continuous summary of like a massive graph of information. Sorry, a lot of ideas here, but
yeah, thank you, Chris. In terms of criteria, I think we agree that number one, it should be easy for developers to implement. We shouldn't come up with some crazy stuff. We should use whatever methods and things exist. That's really important. And secondly, the core thing is I have a three-dimensional thing of knowledge. I want to give it to you. I don't want to have to worry about anything. Just want to give it to you, whether virtually or by email or whatever. So the minimum amount of stuff it needs to show, even though I may have fancy software or not. That's really the entire spec. Fabian, please.
So I think it's interesting that we see we hear everybody's perspective about, is it a game engine or is it an operating system, JSON or protocol, class inheritance or prototyping. I think it shows a bit that the idea is not clear, to be upfront. It doesn't sound that we found exactly necessarily how to express it. Because I also have another interpretation. So my understanding of it, but again, I'm not even sure that we managed to isolate it enough, is closer to another discussion we had before, which is MIME types. When you send around a piece of data, you're supposed to say what is in it. Is it an image? And then if it's an image, what what is the format, PNG, JPEG, all this. And the goal of that is to have interoperability, but not just, for example, of 3D object in the scene of a game engine, but pretty much any kind of digital content. Is it text? Is it an image? Is it PDF? Is it music? Is it whatever? And again, whatever the format of that music would be, is it also using MIDI? Is it recorded? I mean, and I think it's important indeed, because if we're just in 3D, for example, we can pass USD, so 3D models around, or GLTF, etc. But we probably want text to annotate it. We probably want audio maybe to make a comment on it. And what makes a desktop or an operating system powerful, besides making the actual harder work, is that you can have whatever kind of content and either embed some kind of content in another, or transform it so that it's one type. So I think, yeah, I'm not sure we clearly defined it. I think the icon, like as a way to visualize it, like you have a thing in a space. So I think it's a bit more than a game engine. It could be a game engine in the sense that that game engine wouldn't expect either just a script on how a 3D model behaves, or even a 3D model, the typical type like sound or effects or whatnot. But something more generalist like this. It would most likely be implemented through a game engine, but I think typically game engines, they are very narrow in terms of focus. They make games, which is perfectly fine, efficient at it, but it's not as generalist as, or even let's say, oh, we need a new MIME type for some kind of content. Again, it could be implemented with a game engine, but I think it's the way to pass around things. And what I imagine, again, is, yeah, let's say GLTF to present either a MIME type association, so an array of, you have a bunch of MIME types, and then you have applications in front that could open them or not. And the icon is a way to make it kind of not tangible, but give a visual and grabbable affordance to it. And then eventually pass that 3D object from one service to another to be able to edit it, modify it with whatever paradigm it could be.
So I think hard agree on that, by the way. What I'm kind of pitching here really is not so much a game engine as a browser for the 3D objects that will allow interaction and allow you to pull them from agnostically from multiple sources. And the engine, the ideal world would be there'd be competing Microsoft and Apple one, and use the user one on your thing, and then they'd all make extensions that didn't work on each other's. I mean, in the olden days, we worked out what was in a file by the extension. Then we moved on to joyous things like MIME types, and obviously that none of those are good enough. So what you're describing is more how the world would allow you to interact with something, both to view and modify. And that's effectively what your description here is, be it in an icon. Any digital object has a set of capabilities. And I think I've been thinking about text boxes you could edit as the most degenerate. You can read them and you can edit them, and they each have an icon associated with them, which is a 3D thing existing in space, and some links exist between some of these icons with no beautiful anchoring. They just anchor from the center and make dotted lines until we do something fancy. But I think it's that, what is the things we can't currently do that we'd have the skill set to actually build? And I think protocols are more important than software.
Sorry, I keep not unmuting quickly enough, but obviously, Peter, please go ahead.
Okay. Game engines are, I think, too tightly bound to visualization concerns for us. What we want is something that stays more in the world of text, that can be picked up and visualized on the client side, but we should be able to write little tools that are essentially visualization agnostic to describe in abstract terms where things are in 3D space. And we might not even want to have precise coordinates attached to the objects, but rather have a bag of constraints describing how they should relate to other objects. Also, I think we'd want to have a temporal dimension embedded in these things too, because once that icon gets picked up by Frode, he's going to start doing things in his environment. Carl's going to be moving them to a different position in his environment, and they should be able to know how to get back to the original pristine state. So it'd be sort of like the pristine copy that you received from the network, plus a diff on that for any local changes that you made, so you could back out of them if you wanted, or you could exchange them with other people. For instance, I might like to know how my file was positioned in all of your environments, and your environments could report back those changes that are being made to my server. And then instead of seeing one copy of my file, I could see little shallow clones of it all over, representing, here's where Carl placed his copy of it, here's where Frode placed his copy of it. I could see those, or I could have my system generate an aggregate representation in my memory palace of where it is relative to where everyone nudged it. So sort of imagine like a little elastic attached to each one of them, and Carl's grabbing one, pulling it to where he thinks it should belong. Andrew's pulling it in a different direction, and the actual location that it moves in the space would go to an energy minimization point of all of your decisions on where you'd want to have the thing moved. So game engines, again, they're sort of wedded on the idea of presenting one reality to all of the players that's the same, whereas I think we want to sort of strip that away and allow differentials to be applied that are specific to the individual using the system. So that's sort of my thought along those lines. And of course, also, then you can start getting into the Unix philosophy if we're just using little packets of text to represent things instead of worrying about too much detail on rendering.
Right. That's quite okay. Chris, I guess it's directly to Peter. Please go.
Yes. So one of the things Fred and I talked about was something like this, and the idea that effectively this is a difference between content and style. So the locations of things relative to their parent is effectively almost a style sheet. So you're taking data and then you're styling it. And whether or not you use your local style, you want to override but mirror changes to the parent generally, other than think you've overridden, is absolutely a local preference. It's up to your system to decide how it represents it and whether or not it has the right to send those changes back to the source. It might be a bit like commenting in a Google Doc where it suggests changes, but they have to be approved by the owner. This is effectively just a protocol of editing digital objects, and whether or not you are taking a copy, are you taking a hot copy that you will change but you can make local additions to? Are you just taking a live link so that when you change, you're changing the master and it changes for everyone who subscribed to the locations of the master? That total agree.
Yeah. First of all, just look around the room. If we can't solve this, nobody can. You guys are amazing. The different perspectives here are just such a joy to be in. I'm just going to pause a little bit, and Carl, I think you have lots on your mind from earlier, but anyway, which is why I wrote what I wrote on the sideline. But I'm going to ask you, Andrew, at this point, being the person who has realized what we needed for Sloan, who's going to be the person who will make real this thing we're talking about, right now at the very beginning of it, representing a developer, how would you like this to happen? I'm not saying we need to follow what you say, but it might be useful for you now to talk to the more theoretical people and say, I want it like this would help me, etc. Do you mind doing that for a minute?
Yeah, I just need to clarify first. Are you talking about because the ideas that floated around of live information transfer, so it's like a server versus just information transfer, which is I make some changes and pass them off to someone else who can then make changes more iteration based. Which one are we talking about that you're asking me?
I can actually answer that, and the answer is it depends.
Okay.
The reason I say that is not just to be annoying or superficial. It is I'm not great at computer architecture, so please punch me in the face if I'm wrong here. But I'm trying to separate the shape of knowledge, like this word here and this picture here and this one. That thing with what they refer to inside from the transportation mechanism.
Okay. So I guess
I,
in that case, the way I see it, it would be unnecessary to have it on a live server, um, because you'd almost want snapshots of updates. And I also think that in general, especially like look at this group with all the different time zones, people usually don't work on the same thing at the same time. So I think it'd be more useful to have a way to take the state of your information, save it back into the catalog, and then do with that as you will, either in another software or import it back into, say, my XR space. Um, so I could arrange a catalog. I could pass it off to you, Frode. You could see what I've done. You could make your changes into a way that makes sense for you. And now you have your version of the catalog. But because everything would be versioned, we could, if we cared to, look at the difference between them. Or you could just pass that along to someone else. That's the way that
yes.
it makes sense the most to me.
Yeah, that does make sense. It should, of course, be possible within this system to do live, such as in a meeting. But that could be just lots of updates happening. The key, and I'm not dismissing the discussion on that. I'm just saying, this was hi, Brandel. Just a 10-second recap. We're talking about the idea of how to share knowledge shapes, like a knowledge graph, but in 3D. And Chris got the idea of on a computer, traditional computer, you have icons in a desktop. Anybody can move the icons around, even if you can't necessarily open the information. So with that analogy, we're thinking of sending around, sharing such sculptures that have a minimum set of kind of icon information, but we don't worry about whether you can go into the different bits and stuff. Yeah, that was really a key thing. Mark, please. Mr. Anderson.
This something links back to, I think it might have been Peter. I forgot who was who mentioned it. In terms of what things represent and how we store them, in the sense that we're talking about sort of like XYZ coordinates, but in reality, often in something like a sort of knowledge exploration space or a sort of mind palace or something, actually the relationships are normally in relation to something else. So the green square is over there because it's not next to the red triangle. Its actual XY position is almost just a derived bit of information. What that leads one to also consider is, okay, well, when I take that object across from my space to your space, so where does it go? In other words, is the XYZ position really important, or is it actually the relationship to something else? Is it basically this thing needs to be close to the central point of view within the space, and that thing needs to be far away, in which case it will have perhaps a different XYZ thing. I don't claim to have an answer here, but I just think it's something to bear in mind. And also, unless you're dealing at room scale, you also have to think about projections and all sorts, so in other words, once you have some degree of distance built into your model, it turns out, we have to deal with things like, even if we're working in a convected space, we might be representing something that has to involve, say, the curvature of the Earth. And so all these things start to sort of play into a sense of, oh, well, it's a bit more than an XYZ.
Absolutely, Mark. And, on the Vision Pro, for those who have tried it, the volume kind of has an underside. You can change the whole size of it, but the question is, should it be boxed or not? Jeremy, please.
Yes, I wanted to say that it seems to me that content negotiation here could be very applied. So we were discussing about at some point about game engines. They could indeed be used to render virtual reality, but if you don't want to assume that everyone has the same game engine running, we could also use content negotiation system with browsers on the web. We don't need all those to have the same browsers to interact with the web, but each browser can do its own content negotiation with the server. I think this could be very relevant to simpler, so that if we have different ethnic users, they could all have their different interfaces, and then they could directly ask what they need. So for example, if they have different, one needs positions, specific positions, one needs relations, so they could ask for what they really need, and the server could provide this information or fall back to a default description that this client may or may not understand.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, as I was writing in the chat here to Chris Gebhardt, the discussion of how to distribute it is very important, and I think it is in parallel to how to encode it. So I'm listening to what you're saying and thinking it's yeah. Carl, please.
So to touch on Mark Anderson's point and to maybe genericize it, transform location of a thing, at least in terms of game engines or 3D software, how they normally do that. A transform is a vector 3. It's 3 floating point numbers that represent an X, Y, and Z coordinate. That is, if you think about it generically, it is an offset. And so like Mark said, it is in relation to something else. It's a pointer, if you think about it in computer science terms. So that pointer says this object is this much offset from this thing. And what this thing typically refers to is the origin of that 3D space. It's location at 0, 0, 0. There's no reason you cannot keep that same offset and change what that pointer is referencing. So say, rather than this be the offset from the origin, instead this is the offset from the parent object that this is attached to. So you can change what that pointer does, and now it will move in 3D space, but it will move to that offset from its new base, wherever that parent object is. So you can theoretically do this the same way with your objects, your documents, whatever it is you're talking about. You say, we have a location, we have a where it is descriptor of the thing, and it is in relation, it is in reference to something else. But you can allow the end user, after they download it, to rebase that pointer to have it reference something else, whether it's something they made, something on their local machine, something they've done a change to, whatever it is. You just have to let them be able to move that pointer, whatever it's referencing.
Thank you for that. And Brandel, I'm glad you're here. I just really want to say what I think this is for, to see if we're on the same page on this, so to speak. This is so that basically all knowledge can be shared anywhere. It has to be that generic, right? Because the basic stuff of having a thing in space related to this, that, and the other in a volume is so important. We really cannot afford any single company to own this. So, it's great that we look into all these kind of edge cases, but the simplest thing is, here's a sculpture, you have it. Randall.
I was going to describe a little bit about what a browser is and what it means it does with assets and materials. For the most part, a browser is not so opinionated, actually, as to make determinations beyond what the author has indicated they want the browser to do. So if you go to a web page, providing that the mechanism for use that the web page indicates is understood to be safe in terms of, like, you're asking for device motion, say it's a phone, and the script on the page asks for it and is either granted it or not. It knows whether it's been granted it or not, and it gets to use that data. Likewise for the requisition of certain assets. So you can load WebGL without a permission. You just it loads it. People do have the ability to disable it. In practice, nobody does. And if you want to load WebXR, then there's again a permission gate. You know when it's happened because it's a very hard cut between what you can do with it and what you can do without it. So it's in that line that it's very likely that a spatial browser, a browser that has the ability to understand the relationship between entities and objects and things, would come to light. And so while people could build user agents, there are the exceptions are things like reader mode, as it exists on Safari, and unfortunately, it is not as perfect as it could be. I think in macOS Sequoia, I just downloaded today, it also has the ability to do some level of automated AI summary to say if a page is about a place, things like that. But that's really an edge case, something that actually mostly only Safari has done so far, is sort of test the waters of saying, like, if this is a user agent acting on behalf of the user, what do you want this thing to do? So those are things that could happen, but by far and away, the main thing that a browser does is just convey the intent of the page. And that means that people can build libraries and scripts and things that have the ability to have a multiplicity of uses. That's where the idea of the responsive web comes in, a page that works just as well on a phone as it does on a desktop computer, that kind of thing. But that's really mostly the intention of the web page rather than particular smarts, no offense to my colleagues, in the actual browser implementing it. It really is a partnership between the two based on this common protocol application programmer interface. So to that end, in terms of what location means, it is largely up to the authors to figure out what they want to do with it. Something that I am proposing is an intrinsically spatial element that doesn't need to be loaded in WebGL, where you don't have to carry around your renderer and your parser as well as your objects. It can just be made out of your object. But in terms of what that has the ability to do, that's limited by the level of literacy people have for the table stakes of what it is that a model exists for. And for the foreseeable future, nobody has any ideas. So what we will be doing is providing the idea of a model such that the author has the ability to kind of apply and imply a meaning to it. And that hopefully will be enough for Fabian and other motivated authors to be able to come up with interesting things to do with it. I see it as the first step along a long road toward a spatial web. That's not something that I have the ability to comment on in terms of timelines, but I think everybody who's sort of involved in the standard space, building browsers, I was just talking to all of them a couple of weeks ago, agree that browsers should turn spatial and that we need to look ahead for the next 5 to 10 years to figure out what that means for the technical architecture, as well as what people sort of conceptually are doing with this increasing spatiality of browsers. But yeah, so to Froda's point, the aim is for no one person to own this, and for everybody to have a clear concept of what space is for and what space can do, because that will surely influence what becomes spatial, not just 3D models, but 3D CSS grid or 3D media queries, the kinds of things that say, the browser being this wide versus this wide. If you want to have conceptual anchors, say, to a space that seems to be planar, or a space that seems to be a work surface, a space that seems to be temporal, like recognizing a clock and saying, put timers near time-like things. Those kinds of things could be really interesting as goals for a web that becomes spatial and then spatially semantic. So yeah, hopefully that helps frame what it is, which decisions are incumbent on which parties.
Yes, to all of the above. And also, Carl here is in the chat talking about the more generic and versatile you make a thing, the fewer people can use it, because the more knowledge and learning it requires, the more streamlined and easy you make a thing, the less powerful and versatile it becomes. This is why I think it is so important to separate the knowledge shape from what the entities are. I think that is the genius thing that Chris came up with on Friday. It's absolutely complete genius, because if we have a way we describe, to use Apple's Vision OS language, a volume. In a volume, the end user can make it large or small, right? But as long as we have the X, Y, blah, blah in there, as long as each little thing is represented by a minimum set of representations, anybody should be able to make it, anybody should be able to read it. The really, really key thing is, if I have made a link to a fantastically expensive prototype something, you have to have that software to open that node if it is openable. Nothing wrong with that. So we really are only talking, to go back to the original analogy here, imagine a 2D desktop, Macintosh, Linux, Windows, whatever, to be able to share a live view of that with someone, or even just to give it to someone. just to hear you without the content or the icons is so crucial. 1 second, Chris. Because the top level issue that I've always had for 40 years now is that whenever some kind of a core knowledge shape is designed, I always want a level on top that can connect them all. This becomes turtles all the way down, as Chris said. You know, anybody can have a knowledge shape as their core. That's what's amazing. And it cuts the complexity a lot. Chris, please. And you're muted.
So there's definitely an interesting thing about curated outputs and whether or not this is like a browsing a museum or looking at my desk. And my desk is definitely not a curated space. There are tools everywhere, and they're exactly where I like them to be. I think also, though, I was imagining, and I've been thinking about this in the 2D thing I did with Frode a few years ago, and I was thinking how I'd hit, say, an existing out document to it. And I think for the first thing, the interesting thing to me is how do you interact with documents that already exist and are used in some kind of productivity in the real world? And the obvious ones are documents, websites, data structures, spreadsheets, and I really don't want something which gives me a 2D spreadsheet in a virtual space that then I can move all the cells around. I'm just going to turn it into Ted Nelson. Sorry. But so I'm trying. What I was imagining was where you talk about curating the locations of things for people's benefit. I think it's far more likely I'll push a button to do that. And you were talking about force graphs and things, and so I can imagine when I pull in from this document, I have in my virtual space a copy of what is let's say it's a copy of Frode's document that but it has version management on and it knows what its parent is. I can't write to the parent, but it has version management both on the content of the document and on the spatial layout of the document, which is its own conceptual data in its own right. The effectively X, Y, Z coordinates, rotation scale, things like that are a document too with rights of who can change it. I will then ask to expand this document out into chapters, and I would imagine that I will, even if it's never happened before, the software would go, well, I will, for this region or this workspace that you're asking to work on, it has the following items on, and they have these relative positions in this space. Whether I want this space to be the side of a cathedral or the size of a just sitting on my virtual desk in my workspace, I want it to be there, and I want to be able to pick up the set of icons and interact with them as a set, and then individually, and when I've finished working on it, maybe just fold that back down to a flat icon. The difference between looking at a zip file and looking at the contents of the zip file. Obviously, then any system could then push changes back, same as we would with word processors version control. But I think for me, the real thing is that that one thing being its own unit of related items that I can interact with. And at the simplest level, we could do this over REST. I mean, JSON plus REST, we create a description for a digital space that has permissions and the information you need to interact with the space to read objects and potentially write changes back. And I think, and by a digital space, I don't mean a whole digital space. I mean, I have created this little toolbox, and at the simplest level, there would be a few interactions you could do with digital objects, and they would be described by the interface when you grab the workspace. And the obvious one is get the 3D description. Maybe it could animate later. Let's not go nuts because we can do fancier things later. But I saw the thing in the chat is it Kyle? Is it Kyle saying complex or simple? And the middle ground is extensible, which means you can get people started and then they can go and do their own thing. Then every company does browser wars for a bit, which is potentially a better outcome than simple or complex. So I think designing something that can do some cool things achievably in a way other people go, I could build that and make it better, is potentially the way to go, but not make it locked into something very naive and not Sorry, I'm rambling a bit. Sorry for being
Okay.
distracting again. Other things.
No. Very wise words. I wonder to what degree we can actually do that. But to simplify this, we should probably separate the discussion from how to distribute an update from what is the shape. I'm going to start experimenting and going back and forth between 2D and 3D, just using iCloud with a JSON file as a start. Is anyone horrified by that? Because that could be
So iCloud is a perfectly, as a substrate to do synchronization, iCloud is reasonable. One of the things that other people will want to use is something called a conflict resistant data type that has the ability to actually log changes and reconcile the consequence of changes. And so to do something like that, GitHub is a pretty useful structure. There are better ones, but something like Git gives you the ability to actually preserve the state of all of the, or to reconcile what the final state should be on the basis of the sort of accumulated total of all of the actions over something. Whereas iCloud's just going to give you hopefully the like the final state of something with enough integrity that it's never going to break because of all of the cumulative changes. And that's because it's not opinionated about what kind of file type it is. Git is really for text stuff and completely falls over if you hand it something slightly non-textual because of the sort of confusing and non-trivial way in which the byte contents are altered as a consequence of it. So that seems reasonable. It depends on what you want to be representing. If you want to be talking about changes, then you'll need something more sophisticated.
So that was very useful. Thank you, Brandel. What I'm thinking about really is logically and technically separating the shape from the distribution, because it should be possible to email someone this, right? And just a one-off thing, like was discussed higher up in the thread. And of course, the ultimate would be live with tracking and all of that stuff. But as far as the actual knowledge shape is concerned, I don't think it should share. Is that a very naive assumption to make? Because I could imagine giving you things, live sharing it via server, having different mechanisms for different uses. And we have amazing geniuses here on this to be able to different ways. Or will the shape not be able to accommodate that?
A shape? I'm sorry, I'm not. The audio just a little fuzzy, so I wasn't sure of all of the words in there. So you're saying, well, there's going to be a difference between what you can share via email because it's intrinsically static unless what you're actually sharing is a pointer to a live reference. So it will be a snapshot of some stuff, which could be the accumulated total of a number of actions rather than as the final state, so that you'd have the ability to play back and forth through it. But unless you have some live link to some additional resource, then it's not something that you can get a live update from.
Yeah, but I'm saying that the most important thing for me, I've been writing about this all last week, and this has been all kinds of nonsense. But in all the conclusions I come to, there are two freedoms we want. We want the freedom to interact, and we want the freedom to share. Interactions and sharing can be done in different ways. So sometimes I just want to give you, Brandel, this is the thing I'm thinking about as a shape. And I may never talk to you again. Other times we have to do it live. But the structure itself should be separated from that, right?
Are you talking about the tangible spatial structure versus the technical structure of the data that carries what it ends up looking like?
I can't answer that as intelligently as you asked the question, but I can put it this way. Imagine on my macOS Finder, I have certain files in a certain layout. I send you a shape of that, not a screenshot, a shape of that. You can view it on your computer, and you can move them around, but you can't necessarily open them depending on what you have. It's pretty much exactly that, but in 3D. See you later, Peter. Hope your mom as well.
Bye-bye, guys. See you Wednesday.
Bye-bye.
Hey, Peter. Well, so it's interesting because, for example, in Finder, I actually don't know whether there's any clear mechanism to extract given users' icon arrangements, for example, and to Chris's earlier point, that his desktop wouldn't convey information that he would care to share with folks because it's not reflective of any particular intentional order. So depending on the system, if somebody engineered a system where they were building, because a web page doesn't have sort of an intrinsic capacity for the arrangement of icons. People build a bunch that do look like it, but it's kind of on them to construct it. So they could do it. You could convey that as a JSON object or as whatever you wanted. You can have a JPEG where you have colored pixels that correspond to the names. It does stuff like that before. People don't like it when you do, but yeah. So it's possible to send that stuff around, depending on whether that information is accessible, in a sort of in a ready to hand form. What was the question?
There wasn't a question. There was the issue of absolutely, first of all, your own personal desktop you may not want to share. I completely understand that. And also, there isn't a mechanism that is available to the user programmatically where your icons are on your desktop. That's something owned by the OS. It's literally a metaphor. So here in Author, as most of you have seen, we have a 2D map of knowledge that happens to be mine. I designed it. But anybody should be able to use any kind of software and put entities like this in space. And as some of you know, they have information behind them. That's like a level lower down, but at least on the iconic level, they're showing the name or a picture preview or whatever. The relationship of this in 3D space, whether it's made in Author or someone's kind of desktop or other software, I just think that I would not forgive myself if in 20 years we talk to people who are in desktops and they realize what we've been doing today, and they cannot do something like this and just share it with anybody else. It would be ridiculous. So we're really talking about the basic sharing. What is inside the entities is a secondary problem.
Okay. So, yeah, there's not a default for that kind of information representation today. So HTML, obviously, people have the ability to construct a thing where you would be able to go like, here's a text string and it has a CSS class, or you have inline CSS styles on it that indicate that it has this offset from the parent. You can construct those things with a hierarchy and make sure that those translations and offsets are relative versus absolute to the point made earlier. But that's not what HTML's for, and so it doesn't really like doing that. And by that I mean the things that you need to do to the representation are somewhat at odds with what the representation is primarily there to convey, because HTML is for pages that have the ability to reflow and scroll and stuff like that. And while you can build something like this, because of the opinions you need to bake in, then they're doing slightly different things. I do think it is still too early to really make this recommendation. But if you're talking about something where the positional data is the most germane, then a 3D format like GLTF, but actually, in fact, USD is going to be the best one for this. GLTF is the 3D format that a bunch of people like because it's open source. It's actually Kronos, and Kronos can be kind of belligerent as a standards mediator, which presents challenges to some parties. So that's slightly different. But USD, we are going to be adding a text schema, and that should have all of the actual full definition of, the cant of the type based on whether it's italic. There's also this thing that people do in CAD where they just take an oblique font and they just steer it. And that's a different thing that means different stuff. And we believe we need to do all of it. And so that's going to be a really interesting thing, because USD is obviously it's the thing that people made at Pixar for Moana and other films. They just make shows all day, every day. And so USD is going to be as good as it is for 3D, and also as good as it needs to be for text to the full extent that Adobe and Autodesk and Apple and other folks will need it to be. And so it is not the right format today, but check back later for construction updates.
Thanks, Brandel. Leon, just one brief second. So, Andrew, how do you feel about that? Because let's say you have to build something now, because you represent a very clever general with good experience XR developer, so you're the real world person here. If you don't feel like doing it a specific way, I don't think a lot of other developers will either.
I mean, there's a sense in saying that, but also if we build the word's escaping me. If we build a standard that already exists by the time someone is starting their project, they can build their project with that in mind. So of course we want to make it as approachable for developers as possible. But just having it exist already will shape the way developers work if they know about it.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Andrew. Thank you. And Carl here wrote a really good question and list. I'll get to that after you, Leon. Please, Leon, go ahead.
Yeah, I got triggered because Brendel mentioned GLTF and USDC, which is dear to my heart. I I think there is a couple of observations I made. Is that first of all, the assumption that files are going to be very important in the future. I'm not sure if that will be from the point of the mainstream. I mean, we have a share button these days, and I think most people don't even know they are actually sharing files under the hood when they share something with somebody. They just see an icon, an image. So yeah, that kind of like leaves it up for debate whether it's wise to settle on one or another file format. Another thing, I'm also what I also think is very smart of Brendel, like if you look at the, he was saying something like Pixar is making this text and they're doing a lot of things on a daily basis, and they come up with an idea to basically solve problems for their use cases. And this also made me think about the ratio between writers and readers. Like for the web, it has been a very sort of old debate, like it would be great if it would be read and write friendly for everybody, but it turned out to be a bit more readers than people actually writing the websites. And I think in this sense, it's actually good to sometimes wait a bit and see what, for example, Pixar comes up with, because there's a really cool sort of cycle between the companies and the commons, where the companies, they sort of like, they have to move quickly. They come up with, let's say, a text schema, and everybody is happy because it has been paid for, it is high quality, we can play with it. And then another iteration can come from the commons that, hey, maybe we want to see knowledge graphs with these text schemas inside a USD. And then you only have to develop something really small on top of the text schema of what Pixar developed. So I think in that sense, sort of lazy constructiveness, a bit like waiting a bit, not trying to completely do something from scratch, can be very useful. And so yeah, that's what my thoughts are. That the file format arena is a very complicated one, and yeah, it's very interesting to see what is happening, which file formats are actually useful and used by companies, but also by mainstream. Where is this generic sort of like Venn diagram you want to focus on? So yeah, that's just my few cents here.
Yeah.
Oh, so many wonderful things. I have to comment on a few of them. One of them, the Venn diagram of readers and authors, really comes down to one thing we've been discussing in the Sloan project, which is annotation is an important part of reading, at least for academic readings. And once you start annotating, you are already authoring, because you are making your own information, right? In a sense. And what I feel is really important here is that we don't want to enter XR by having the default being author rectangular blocks of text. That would be awful. So therefore, when you put stuff in a space to organize it, whether you're authoring or whether you're just organizing your library or your thoughts, it's going to blur. So that is really very different from the web. Of course, the first web browser was read-write, and there were lots of issues around that. So I jokingly in the chat put PDF or XR. Right. I think we should, because I see the brilliant questions by Carl up there. These are all great questions. But right now, for next year, Andrew's going to be building an authoring environment in XR. We all have to decide in the Sloan community, this includes you guys, obviously, to make that there, what that should mean, right? And we are not talking about sitting typing in a box. What we are doing is how can you configure a shape of knowledge that you can share based on other knowledge, right? So it's basically this. So a lot of the fine things are great, but in a few years, I really want someone to feel that, hey, I couldn't send you the fancy thing. Here is the basic shape. So PDF or XR, just so nobody will punch me, but it's half a joke. What do you mean it exists, which is already cool? Oh, right, yeah, I see what you're saying there, Fabian, if you want to discuss it more.
Just a quick anecdote that I'm doing a bit of 3D printing at home, and for this I need to design pieces, hence I have different iterations. And annotation is so important because, of course, that's the process of going to one iteration to the next. It's not perfect, so you need to describe why it's not good enough. And annotating in general is really, I think it's so precious. But annotating in 3D, in 2D, so you're annotating your 3D model when you're on a desktop, for example, with Blender, which is the software I use to do this, it just, like, it technically it works, but it doesn't really make sense. Like, you have a kind of flattening and again a layer on top of it, which is, again, it's so much, it's infinitely better than nothing. So I'm again so grateful for it. But we're not there for annotation in 3D without XOR at least.
So let me throw a provocation to all of you, because Fabian, similar to what Randall was doing earlier, we're talking about the real, proper, solid 3D, so to speak. Carl asked all kinds of great questions. Just to read some of it. Do you want to make a multidimensional table for us sometimes in the future? Define these meta objects. List out what characteristics are mandatory versus optional, overridable, immutable, and so on. These are important and useful things. I have a program right now for a short period of time that I'm going to try to do this vision app for doing the space. So if we say that for the future of text on the 23rd of November, we want to be able to demonstrate basic transfer, but maybe even to what Andrew has built, if it's clear enough. What would we do? You know, I don't want this to become, we will do a better one next year. Because next year there will be more headsets, there'll be more standards. What do we want to do to jury rig something just to impress the hell out of our audience and inspire them?
So I'll answer without even waiting, because I've already sent a JSON somewhere to the internet. So if somebody wants to pick it and do something with it, it's there. Sorry to be a bit like answering the question without any philosophy or anything, but the file is down there. It's probably imperfect, but it has some data and text behind it. So in order to do this without the discussion of doing it, somebody, anybody, however they want, that really doesn't matter. They have to parse it and do something with it. Sorry.
No, don't be sorry. Can you please talk some more about this? Because I've seen some of what you've done. And I think that is really, really important. I mean, I honestly think we can pack a lot of stuff into JSON. And if we just, we take.
It was, what was it? Like a list of bibliographic references from Zotero and adding some XYZ coordinates and putting on WebDAV. But exactly how it's been done doesn't really matter. The point is, I'll look it up actually. I have another different history browser now, so it will be a bit tricky, but I'll put the link in the chat. It's probably in our archive somewhere. There is a JSON with some coordinates on the topic. So again, it just has to be parsed, and it's not really heavy. I don't think it's sufficient, but it exists.
Chris, you wanted to say something about this?
Sorry, I got cooking and then people, Amazon delivery drivers got a bit chaotic. But I really think the thinking about passing files around between you is weird. No, as you say, no, people don't think in files. What I'm imagining this as is a 3D, almost a 3D style sheet that describes a way to interact with digital objects. Where those digital objects exist, I don't care. Realistically, they exist on a cloud drive. They might exist on a local machine if you're being weird or secure, but ultimately it doesn't matter. And I'm imagining that the important thing here is you have this interaction model with a virtual. So you have the 3D model, which describes the entities, how to interact with them, how to get their content, and potentially how to change them. I think thinking of it as documents is really kind of odd, and I think thinking about it as you mail virtual spaces to each other, that just doesn't sound like something we'll be doing. Maybe, I mean, you're thinking maybe as authoring documents, but yeah, I think, as I said, separating it out and very much having it so that you can have documents where the digital objects physically exist in different places. Maybe one's on Google and one's on the Amazon cloud, for all I know, and they're all existing in one space for you to work with at the same time. And the 3D parts of it are just pointers into digital objects which you can interact with. And I think trying to build a world thing to describe a world, I'm imagining more just, I have my personal workspace, which contains some other workspaces I've been working on, and all of those are just metaphors for digital objects. Is what I'm imagining. So I think other people may be looking at this elephant from other angles, if you know the old computer science story.
Just briefly, we're looking at the same elephant, I believe, you and me, Chris. I am looking at, here's the project for the Future of Text Symposium. It's got this, that, and the other. It's a volume over here. Or there is some photography stuff I'm doing. So they literally are post-its that happen to be 3D floating in space. And I do think that it'll be worthwhile being able to share them in different ways. Brendel.
Okay. So because we have the web, because we have the internet as it exists today, people call it the internet, but people who build browsers and documents and things like that say the web. I do think that it's most practical to think of what the future of information is going to be as unless there is a very, very strong reason for it not to inherit from the architecture of the web to flow pretty much directly from it. And so I do think that sort of being aware of not just the present metaphors, but the motivations for it is pretty important in order to figure stuff out. But I also do agree a lot with Chris in that the idea of these sort of monolithic documents, these entities that are sort of either or, you look at this or you look at that, are sort of to some extent the product of a bygone era where we had these really strictly limited aspects of the real estate available to devote to things. And so when you only have that visual real estate to say, like, I only want to look at that, then that's all you do. And for those of us who are old enough to remember, I mean, some people are old enough to remember Lynx and NCSI Mosaic. I actually don't think I ever used Mosaic, but my dad did. But before tabbed browsing, that was what the only metaphor for the web was, unless you really wanted to somehow sort of copy a URL onto another computer that you happen to have sitting next to you. And so the idea of sort of parallel browsing was totally anathema to what people were in practice doing. And one of the reasons why browsing search history is such a a poor artifact today is because it's a throwback to that and people haven't really improved it. But given that we will have space, however we get it, whether it's going to be something like Humane Technologies projection thing, or somebody takes the Lightform LFX form factor and plays with it more, or something like Vision OS and what people are doing on Horizon OS, I guess people call Quest now, to better conclusions and better endpoints. We probably have more space to devote to things. And I really love what Weblo consists of in terms of these aspects of progressive disclosure. It's something that I've been trying to play with at times with other people's money in sort of advertising land for the last 14 years, is this notion that you have nodes that can kind of expand and kind of sort of responsibly make use of all of the space that is devoted them in order to represent themselves and what people might want to do with it. And so that, I think, will have to happen, and it's somewhat at odds with what the web has been for the last 30 years because this overarching idea of like, you're on this page and then you're on that page, rather than you're on this page and you're on this page and you have this much for that page and that much for that. So that's a really big change. That's a really big cut for the web to be able to make. But I think that once we do, we'll be on a much better basis to be able to kind of construct a spatial web.
Chris, go.
I'm muted. You're muted, Chris.
Sorry. One of the things we've talked about Freud a few times is the fact that we really do 3D space terribly badly. We do not make computer screens work like desktops. We call it that, but we really don't, because you can Alt tab at the very simplest. You can have multiple desktops. We can do interesting things like that. We can have several things open at once, and you can be looking at the same thing as me, even though remotely. And the metaphor's wrong. It's not. And I think this idea of trying to make 3D models which represent the real world drives me absolutely nuts. And it's one of the things I keep on wanting to get someone to do a game engine where the kids can set the physical rules of the universe, not just like, oh, you can build a little object and it's a bit like Minecraft. It's like, no, I want them to be able to change how they navigate, how they rotate, what the rules are, how objects are attracted to each other and things, because there's going to be better navigation systems. And one of the key ones is being able to shrink and zoom. And I was imagining if I was working on this thing in 3D, I wouldn't have, I haven't played with Roblox, so I don't know. But I was imagining that in a 3D model like this, you wouldn't need to expand the thing. I could just look really closely and I can see all the component parts. It will just automatically decompose it for me and put the next level down or something. And I can just zoom in, make myself very small and go and have a look around this thing and then go back out to be normal size and things. Yeah, sorry, that was a thing. And the thing you were saying about links and web browsing. Damn it, it's gone. No, sorry, I just always wait too long. But I need note paper to remember every idea I have. Sorry.
Oh, I write notes in the chat, so that's why they're not often readable. Randall, I very much hope we will get to the spatial web. Absolutely, as we've been talking about. Sorry about the background right now. With WebXR being an intermediary. Yeah.
Chris has got it.
I remember. Yes, that reminded me. Yes. So the other thing is the idea that things exist in one and only one place. I want to be able to look at the back of my own head. I want to be able to have.
I did that. It's really embarrassing.
No, but I don't. Yes, it's not. But metaphorically, I think in an object, there's no reason I can't have this unpacked to 3 levels at once, like I would on the desktop. I have windows open on several bits of my file system, and I can do what I want with them. I don't, and I want in my 3D space the things that I want that I'm working on in the context I'm working on them. I might be working on something in a structured mode and in a visualization of some analysis of it, which is using a force graph to put the objects apart. I want them to be both on either side of my lounge. I don't want this forced metaphor. Okay, that was the other thing.
Yeah, that's great. That's the importance between the diffs between geography and topology as an interesting way of looking at it. But the thing is, we still need a way to take the shape of knowledge and give it to someone else, either live or as a, here you go, put it on your system. If we don't have that, all of this other stuff either becomes fantasy or it becomes very, very specific when world, right? It's in one environment. So in terms of describing the top level of this structure, where we have the notion of an icon, why not just describe that in JSON? And then it can refer to richer things. What would be the, yes, Chris?
Yes, JSON, but not JSON, just JSON. It's JSON at a specific web address that you give someone for this item. They have permission to read that file at a web address and they get it from it. And they either can treat that as canonical or make their own version, and it has its own address, which they can then address. And it also describes how to write back changes and how to get sub-objects from it.
Yes, to a certain extent, but we live in a world of link rot. Right? There's no such thing as the cloud, ultimately. The cloud is a temporary storage that is paid for by someone. DNS costs money, server costs money. So we should use the web a lot, no question. But if you have been reading research into some topic that you want to write about, and you put a little bit of it there, a little bit of it here, maybe a video there, using your entire room as your research room, you don't want that to be dependent on a server only. You should absolutely be able to say, here's the bit that's related to our meeting, tear it off, so to speak, and share it with the group. There's a reason a document is called a document. You're documenting a version of something at a moment in time. Yeah, so Carl, please read this. I was just going to say that what I'm just trying to do is separate all the high-tech detail stuff away from the basic structure. But please make your case to the recorded video, if you don't mind.
Oh, I didn't want to jump ahead of Mark, but so we've occasionally brought up this topic of like some sort of all-in-one application space viewport editor, whatever it is. It always sounds great. I can have a billion web pages open. I can reach out to a resource anywhere on the web, on anyone's machine that anyone gives me, and I can just bring it into whatever workspace I currently have open. It imports correctly. It looks exactly how it should. It just functions, and I can incorporate it seamlessly into whatever workflow I'm already doing. And I can do that for any kind of file, any kind of resource, object, reference, graphic. It doesn't matter. I can just pull it in, and I'm uninterrupted. I can just like stream of consciousness, stream of thought, not have a break in what I'm doing and pull stuff in. And that is a marvelously utopian view of like ADHD hyperfocus, which sounds great. And if you're in that flow state, it is great to not have to alt tab, to not have to open a new browser, open a new application, go dig up an email. It's great. However, if you're not in that flow state, or if you're not ADHD, having these kind of all-in-one, it does everything. You can just reach out and touch anything you want. You just have to think of it. Those kind of things are like, they cause decision paralysis, and they're overwhelming for like certain kinds of people. And you see this manifest now in things like ChatGPT or AI-based image generators, where it's just like, please write your text prompt in here and whatever you want, here it is. A lot of normal people who don't have a lot of tech experience, you put them in front of one of these tools, and after about 10 minutes, they don't know what to do with themselves. They've completely run out of things to ask it because they can't generate those ideas in that kind of space with no constraints.
I don't think we're talking about one space that does all with no constraints. I agree with your issues very much. By the way, I put in a link to author, which is related to this. The point is that at some point, if you built a specific, okay, let me put it this way. Would somebody ever want to share a spreadsheet with someone else? Probably, right? All we're talking about is a 3D spreadsheet in a very basic level. Sometimes you want to share it live. Sometimes you want to say, this is the result of my research. So all I'm saying is we have to figure out a way to share this 3D thing where each cell, each entity, each object, each node can refer to something else or not. It really is that tiny, tiny, tiny. Because the reality is we're trying to do this with Andrew from other software. So we're trying to do it in the simplest way because what we're doing with Sloan could be copyable by others. Mark, please.
Two quick things. Brought up, thinking back to Brandon's useful comment about the fact of, well, sticking with the paradigms of the web. I just wonder if there's somewhere that you think that those paradigms are well expressed. Not so much for the people in this room, but what I'm thinking is there a list I could show to someone who isn't in this room? And I suspect the answer is maybe not, because actually to know these things, you have to know some stuff already. But maybe that's some dog fooding for us to do. Because if these paradigms are important, as sort of handrails to what we're doing, then maybe they want elucidating, just abstracting into a form where a wider group of people can interact with them. That's one thought. The other thing came up from really just something came out from what Chris was saying, and I keep thinking about authoring. So something that we need to keep an eye on is authoring for these systems. And I'm not thinking, and I agree with the idea that files in a sense is review thinking. It's where we are now, but it's probably won't. It's an abstraction that will change. The thing that we call a file will become something else. So I think we need to be fluid on that. But the point being is how you write for this. At the moment, we write broadly on a pretend bit, on a white rectangle on a screen, pretending to be paper, and we type. So the one advance is we're not using one of these, we're actually using a faux typewriter to do it. That's about the one advance we've made, and that's fine. But there isn't much you can really do to color outside the lines on a typewriter. But for the sort of richness we're talking about, something that I don't see sort of much talked about, and which is something that should interest us, in the context of the future of text, is how you enrich the writing experience. And I'm mindful of the comment I agree with, Carl's comment about Scrivener and the sort of distraction mode, which does, again, put in focus how this richness can be quite overwhelming. But if we're going to create content, let's call it that, rather than files, that are going to be able to be richly pulled apart and reconstructed and all sorts of things, it's going to take more than typing into a blank white rectangle. And that aspect doesn't seem to get much attention from us, and it's something perhaps we should begin to look at. It doesn't run counter to any of these other things. It's just something else we need to take on board. Thanks.
But Mark, that is quite literally the discussion today. It is how you can author something in a dimensional environment.
What are the terms in which we author?
Slightly different thing, actually. We've been talking about more in terms of the information, the data structure. I'm actually thinking about the sort of person who's maybe just writing their 3-part space opera. Everyone seems to be writing one these days, and doing more than effectively typewriting it onto a screen.
But that's not what we're talking about, though. We're talking about constructing rich, multidimensional sculptures.
Yes, and I'm talking about the link from one to the other, because why does it have to be that the person who's writing their space opera has to not have the richness you're talking about? For it to have that, the authoring tools, the authoring environment, the way in which we need to author will need to move ahead. So this is contextual to and complementary to what we're talking in terms of the wider discussion we had today, which is more about information structure.
Sure, absolutely. Brandel, please.
So the point that Carl made about Scrivener is something that I wanted to touch on. And I wanted to say something that sounds initially dumb, is that Scrivener is an application in the sense that it is applied. One of the challenges of the web today is that it has largely abdicated its a browser has abdicated its responsibility in part of being an application to being a framework or a basis for further applications to be developed. And then, I think everybody's had a hand in that, but I think Google's played a big part. And in many regards, we're better off for it. People can build all sorts of applications, web apps, and put them on the web. But what that means is that it is no longer an application insofar as it is applied to a specific intent, which Scrivener has the ability to kind of walk back from and to say, like, no, you're here to write a story. You're here to write a linear narrative, and there are some base component parts that people want to have and return to when they're thinking about a story that consists of places and characters and things and events and all of those kinds of components. And another really successful example of a writing tool that has kind of lent itself toward being more opinionated is Final Draft 10. The screenwriter app that people use has the ability to construct things in these ways as well. There's another one called Snowflake, which applies the Snowflake method, where you have 6 points and then you expand those 6 points fractally outward until you have something as fully fledged as an entire story. And so when you have the it's one of but the word application is similar to the word employment in that we forget all of the different meanings of it when we talk about an app, and it's like, oh yeah, no, an app, yeah, that's all it is, that's all we mean by that. But if you talk about something being applied to something or trying to do something like a job application, like you can have an application to be in you can apply to you can have an application to an application developer position. And all of those words are so heavily laden that it's a wonder the sentence doesn't fall down. But yeah, so when you have the context in which you have the ability for those things to be more opinionated, then you can kind of help people along more with it. Even something like Photoshop is so generic at this point that it doesn't have the ability to kind of convey aspects of what it's there to do and what you're there to do, that what you are situated, either conceptually or in front of a computer or heaven forfend in an actual tangible space to do stuff with. And so yeah, we're going to be at odds with that. To Mark's question about what are the principles of you were asking, like, what are the principles that the web is built with such that people can understand what the web is kind of there to do? There's the constituency of priorities, which is a really interesting thing. It's a little bit more, if you've ever heard users over authors over div let me find it. It's awesome. Users over authors over let me find it on this page. In the case of conflict, consider users over authors over implementers over specifiers or specifiers over theoretical purity. So that means that the web should work best for the people who are seeing it, and then only then should it work well for the people who are making the content on the web, and only then should it be made easy for the people who are building the framework for the people building the content for the users, and so on. And one of the fallouts of that is that a lot of the people who are used to being implementers or specifiers think the web is bad and dumb because it's ugly, and that's because it's easy for the people who are much downstream of them. And a lot of the time when people believe that they are cleverer and have a better idea, it ends up coming at the cost of the ease of use for the consumers. Yeah, so that's a good one in terms of what is good about the web. I don't know that there is much more sort of concrete argument you can make than to kind of just gesture generally and say, I think people have tried to do better and failed for the last 30 years. And on that basis, I don't know where else you want us to go. Yeah, I think that's everything I wanted to say.
Yeah, Leon, please.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. It's sort of like it seems to be one of the few escape hatches which has actually resisted all kinds of challenges. It's still here. I did see in the chat a demo posted by Brandel. It was about the model element, and so it seems that in the future we'll have some sort of very high level support for 3D models in the browser. So which is, I guess, going to be sort of native to the browser, which means if that happens, then we have a very quick way of distributing 3D content. And I would like to remind ourselves that if you take that plus the information that there will be some kind of text schema coming to the USD-Z 3D format, then I think I don't know any other 3D format which is sort of easy to view, which also has text. And well, first of all, that's not very easy, so I'm very curious about that. But that might be some low-hanging fruit to just create a little tiny layer on top, which does the connections between texts. And then I guess, like theoretically, on paper, you would have the most generic way of basically transferring knowledge graphs to each other's. So yeah, it is a file, and it's not. It has to live somewhere, either on your iCloud or on your author/reader database or on your hard drive. But it's a very, a USDZ file or a 3D model file. It can live for a very long time. It can be saved in archive.org if it's online. So the life cycle of such a thing can be incredibly interesting. So yeah, to sum it up, the JSON, which Fabien mentioned, which already has been outputted, I think, by author or reader, which contains links to words, if you add that as a layer to the USDZ with the text schema, which Brandel mentioned, then you have something completely built on standards, and it would be amazing. I think something like that. So that's a low-hanging fruit.
One day.
So, Andrew, of this particular last discussion, how much of that makes sense for you as a current developer in your stage?
I don't think much of it applies at the moment. It's nice theory. If it gets nailed down a bit more, I could apply.
Yeah, so that's the thing. It's really, really easy to go into incredibly deep and interesting discussions, but I wonder a little bit why there's a little bit of unhappiness with the notion of a document. I think document will always remain useful, but not for everything. Just like today, a lot of things we want to have dynamic. But isn't there within what we're talking about now, a way you can package a 3D page, simple, nothing super fancy. A lot of the choice of rendering, like CSS style, would be determined at the user's location, the receiver's location. And whether it's live or not is an additional interesting thing. Brandel.
No, this is just Fabian's leaving.
Bye, Fabian. But you have your hand up anyway, Brandel.
Right. Okay. So, the blessing and the curse of the 3D model element coming along 30 years into the web means that we know the scale of the work, excuse me, that we need to do in order to make it a proper first-class citizen of the web in terms of how it works, what's going to be safe. We had some really wonderful times in the late 90s, early 2000s with window.open pop-ups and tracking cookies and things like that. And we all collectively agree that that's not safe to do now, even if we all were like, well, let's make an exception for 3D model. What would end up happening is that it would end up with such a terrible reputation that everybody would be absolutely skeptical of one and be like, I need all of my browsers to be able to disable 3D models at all times. And people would be like, "Oh, just go and disable JavaScript. That's the way to browse the web." And it's like, "Oh, please don't do that." So we have to build it properly, and we need to build it out of the proper component parts. For better or worse, USD is not ready. It does not have that text specification. So to Andrew's point, there is no such thing to actually look at. There are proposals. Those proposals are inadequate, and we are working with folks to make sure that we have a better basis on which to reason about what is the appropriate subset of things like CSS class text that are necessary to convey into this new world. To be clear, like something like GLTF has the ability to present something that has the appearance of being text, but ultimately it is going to be either textured data or geometry that is masquerading as text. And so, as such, you thought PDF was bad. Holy shit. Like, so don't do that either. But yeah, so it means that nothing is ready. You do have the ability, just like I have that model element page, that is a GLTF. It does not have geometry masquerading as text, but it has null objects with additional meta information that I've assigned to it. To Fabian's earlier point, it's a headache, but it's the least worst thing, much like Churchill's democracy quote, to be able to construct these things at this point. But we ought to be able to do better. And so what I've done is construct a document in the form of this GLTF file, initially Blender file that I'm exporting, that has this information. I have established an agreement with me that I'm going to read it in a certain way. But because it's just an agreement inside my head, nobody else will have the slightest clue what to do with it. And that's where we have an absolute gap in any kind of standards that covers both of these things. And so we have the ability to have pseudo 3D information presented within CSS transform within a web page. We have the ability to have genuine 3D information within things like USD and GLTF. USD does do 3D today. That's okay. It has it's called a preliminary schema that somebody just sort of thought up for their own nefarious purposes at some point in the past. I don't think it's worth people putting much effort into making use of it, because it's sort of visibly inadequate to a broader range of purposes. And so, when we talk about like files and that we do like or don't like files, like I understand that point, but what a file is a protocol. It's an agreement over what kinds of things are important and for what reasons. And so to an earlier point that I think Chris made about like, where are things? It's not just where are things, but like, what does that position actually mean, and how much does it change? Like, is it that you really want it to be at x equals 30, or is it that you want it to be near the warmest place in a room? Because those are different things, and you want to convey them differently. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Please go ahead, and then we'll look at what Jeremy and Carl have been asking here.
Okay, so I think I'm trying to understand why everyone seems to be thinking in different ways. So obviously, you've got lots of different perspectives, but for me, I'm hearing a lot of people who I think for whom creating the 3D model is the output almost. That's the result, is creating this thing that lives in virtual space. Whereas I'm more imagining this as a user interface for modifying information. And to me, there was several ways you could modify a piece of information. I mean, the simplest way is that you could say that when I move this thing, it represents something physically in the underlying model. And the simplest way, I might take my document and I might ask to put my document into and give me all the things that would represent it as paragraphs, and then Ted Nelson style move them all around and paste them back together in a format I like, and being able to just physically, but by physically moving them, I'm actually potentially creating a change in the source. And I think the simplest 3D object in this world would be a null object that doesn't represent anything. Its only existence is in this world and to maybe be relative to other things in this world. The next one would be one that contains some objects and is used as a container to keep things moving together, as you would with things. I've learned a little bit of Blender, and anyone who can do anything in Blender is amazing. I can make squares, and I can make a few other slightly more less geometric things, but still. But I think where it gets interesting is if you want to start interacting with something more complex and have objects that interact with each other, maybe the movement of one object will trigger movements of other objects and things. And at the simplest level, I'd suggest thinking about maybe doing something like 3D Scratch. If you've seen Scratch, which is a programming language for children, where move is a block and turn left is a block, and loop 4 times is a block that can hold other blocks, and you can put loop 4 times, move forwards and turn left into this block, activate the block, and a cat walks in a square. A bit like in my day, we had a thing with a pen, and it was a half dome that walked around the floor of the computer room at primary physical turtles that actually drew things. But that kind of thing, and how you would have that doing something potentially back into the external to this system. You don't want it to be, again, a walled garden. And I think the simplest items you'd configure by just their physical, you'd create them, and then their physical space and where they were would be everything, which is what is, you'd say that this is here, and that has configured my software. But I'll get you up years or so, Freud. But the next thing beyond that is Freud's Word document, where we just have a bunch of paragraphs, and each paragraph is still just old-fashioned text. And when you view it, you move around, but when you change it, you just temporarily get a pop-up virtual 3D window where you're just doing a bit of text editing or something in a very naive sense. But then it's what more complex interactions we might have that actually modify something of interest outside this virtual world. Freud, sorry.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for many aspects of that. Now, we're running out of time for today. I think you guys are, this is not sarcastic, I think you're too intelligent for this question to a degree. Because what I'm just trying to do is find the means through which stuff can be given to other people. And it doesn't really matter what's inside the stuff, just the relationships. And a basic, and thank you, Carl, for asking the question. What is the basic? What is, on a Macintosh, you do the command I, you get a little bit of stuff. That's the basic of that, right? Once we decide on the basic stuff for this icon entity, whatever we want to call it, and we have a relative notation system for XYZ space, it can be shared. What's inside it must be rich. One of my dreams is an entire, and this goes back to Chris Gebhardt's comments, I want to have an entire LLM in a node representing a philosopher that can then interact with the entire space on it. All of these things have to happen, but none of these things can happen in an open way unless we can take this basic thing of stuff and give it to someone else. And I think that should be super simple, described in JSON. And I think we should find some way of, to be clear, using the visual meta approach of saying, here are some fields that are for so-and-so, so that systems can choose to ignore them or not. Right? Like, if you can read GLT files, here's the description of that. If you don't have GLT, you have this. Just one of the things Chris and Mark and I discussed many years ago in terms of addressing, which is very related, was robust addressing. We would say, here's a link. But if you can't find the document there, here's the citation information. You can go look for the document. If you don't know that, at least you should know blah, 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 right? So different ways to describe. But the basics has to be there and the expandability has to be there. Because otherwise we're going to design something amazing that will have a very specific use case. This has to be completely universal. Same way that you can send a text file to anyone now, should be able to send this. Randall, and then I think there's a few more other comments before we finish.
I'm unmuted. So in terms of my going back to 3D models versus the sort of the spatial arrangement of data, I mean, one of the reasons for that is just because I think it is. I mean, it's my goal that the presentation of models as static content is the first sort of brush with what a spatial browser is per se, and so and to that end, a lot of people will be hacking it and playing at the margins in the same way that folks like Andrew are playing, see Andrew, with WebXR to that same end. But at this point, there is no semantic lift that the browser, that the web page is doing to give you information for WebXR. You're entirely on your own. With Model, you will start to have a little bit more support, and my goal is to have that sort of bleed into having an increasing amount of capability actually live in the browser versus the application that somebody builds, the thing that they have applied the page to being able to do. And at some point, that means that the browser will be able to make smart determinations about why you might want this here. Yeah. On the point about JSON, sort of conveying these things, for better or worse, JSON is one of those really unopinionated formats about what's there to do, what's mandatory, and the way that you need to interpret those things. And what you said about having a hierarchy of priorities with regard to being able to source a document or a fragment of information is an extremely interesting but extremely opinionated and robust mechanism that can be conveyed in JSON, but it is not an intrinsic attribute of what JSON is there to do. And so at that point, what you're talking about is not JSON, but a specific schema that you're using. And so that's no longer JSON as a file, that's JSON as a transmission protocol for having a much more opinionated set of things. And if you were to have a schema for that, you've got yourself a file. Congratulations. And that's the stuff that matters about when we talk about files is like, what are the obligations? It's like the Sapir-Whorf thesis. Like, what are the things that speaking in a language oblige you to consider and to include? What are the things that are mandatory, and when they aren't conveyed as part of it, that it is a thought half finished? It's like sending an email without a subject, or an email without a subject and a body. Like, that can contain information that I sent you a message at this time and I sent it from and to these people. That's information, but nobody would really consider that to be a valid email. And many email clients will be like, what are you even doing? So that's where files matter. It's not because it's .jpeg or .png, but because there are mandatory components of information. And I think your insistence on the hierarchy of priorities of like, hit this, and if that doesn't work, hit this, and hit that, and then hit that, and hit that. Like that's a really important thing to consider as a rot resistant component, which is entirely absent from the internet at this point. So that's an interesting thing to think about as a priority, not just for our spatial web, but for everybody in general.
Thank you, Brandel. So in the last minute and a half, I wrote jokingly here, a video should never have to conform to the limitations of a still picture. Like a 3D environment should never have to conform to the limitations of a flat one, but still will give some kind of a preview. And what you mentioned at the end there, Brandel, of course, in today's age, those things can have notes for an LLM to understand better what these different things are, as well as a human. So when we're now defining what a document standard is, it's different from what it used to be. So that's kind of an important thing. But what might be fun and useful if we all, on our own, in an email or whatever, just write down what we think the icon or iconic aspect of a thing should be. It could be interesting if you all just send it to me. I'll put it together in a document, and then we can see what seemed to be obvious and where we might seem to differ. Because the other thing I want to say, just to name drop on all of our behalf, Windsurf is a patron of this community. He's very involved. When the internet was first developed, postgraduate students, right? We all know so many incredible people who made the current world. There's absolutely no reason we cannot be instrumental in laying the foundations for what's coming up in the future. The one thing I do not want to do is only discuss it. And that is why it's so great we have these discussions coupled with experimentation. It is amazing. The favicon, the favicon, yes. That's not bad, actually, Brandel. That is it. Taking the web favicon into this discussion. I love it. I think we'll continue this in a week, but I'm also going to have to start experimenting with just getting the map view and author into Vision Pro. So if you have thoughts on that, do tell. And yeah, Chris, please.
You'll like this one, Frode, because I think I can sum up things in a very Frode way of what I've been thinking, which is icons are one part of it, but what we really needed to work with a 2D computer was also windows and icons, mouse and a pointer. So that metaphor changed it from a single screen where we just had text and it was virtual paper to something completely different. And I think what I'm interested in here is what are the productivity metaphors for a three-dimensional space at all? Like, what is the equivalent of Windows icons, mouse, and a pointer in 3D? You might hate them, but again, it's the worst system except all the other ones. Go back to Churchill.
That's okay. I'm glad my hand was still up because that's really important. There's one thing on this that is so important. The virtual environment can do virtual things. However, Chris, can you point the camera down because it was useful that no, okay, it's off. Right, this thing here, tables, physical thing, right? We talked about XYZ. We've also talked about semantic relationships. A wall and a table, as we've seen in some platforms, mean a lot. Because that's where you can do certain kinds of things with your physical body. So, that will have to be somehow integratable into this. But in terms of workflow, yeah, anyway, this could go on, and I'm so extremely grateful for you guys. But please be very, very selfish. Think about what the hell you want. Write it down, and we will try to make a real thing. I'm investing in this as an independent developer, but I'm investing in an open way so anybody can copy it because I want to win the software war based on the user experience with my stuff. I would find it abhorrent if I locked the data in. So I just represent another developer, right? Similar to how Andrew is representing a WebXR developer. Any last comments, or shall we email or whatever and meet on Monday? Thank you, Jeremy, for joining us. I'm sure it was maybe a little bit more specific today than what you expected, but these discussions do change a lot on Mondays.
Yeah, it was a bit hard sometimes to get into because the subjects were moving very fast and I didn't always have the context, but I still found it very interesting.
And I'm very glad you said that because you're coming here with very little context is useful for us. And so if you do feel like coming back, you're extremely welcome to. If there's something you don't understand, ask. Because, if we're going down a rabbit hole or context that we haven't even thought about, that's really worthwhile. So anyway, thank you all for today. And hope to see you in a week.
Yeah, I'll see if I can join.
Okay, that would be great. Okay, bye guys.
Goodbye, see you.